In fact, one thing you should definitely remember is that this fantasy world is in your own head. In reality, you're only typing words on a computer screen. Just keep telling yourself that, no matter what.
All right, everyone. Welcome to Internet Real Life. So good seeing a lot of familiar faces and new faces. If you have your camera off, feel free to pop it on. Let there be light in the stoa. Um, so yeah, this is the first session of Internet Real Life Season 2. Last year, my co-host for the series, Katherine Dee, reached out wanting to refresh the conversation around the internet because it was getting kind of tired, especially of seeing the same old certain negativity about the internet and what it is and what it will be. So we decided to start this series, and it's based off this dialectic that we were working with. So the thesis is internet optimism. The internet will save us. This was popular in the 1990s and around the early 2000s. So the internet pioneers, McLuhan's Global Village, Young Zuck, the social media days. And then this kind of shifted around the mid 2010s. The internet pessimism started kicking in. Like the internet will destroy us. And this is the doom scrolling, the culture warring, the parasocial weirdness. And we're kind of done, at least Kat and I, with this internet pessimism, and we're wanting to kind of shift the conversation. And there's something uh, similar about optimism and pessimism. And I don't know if anyone is a Byung-Chul Han Pil. This is one of his new book. Maybe you can put it in the chat if you're a Hanian. But the spirit of hope, he talks about pessimism and optimism. And I'm going to read a passage from it. So there's no fundamental difference between optimism and pessimism. One mirrors the other. For the pessimist, time is also closed. Pessimists are locked in time as a prison. Pessimists simply reject everything without striving for renewal or being open towards possible worlds. They're just as stubborn as optimists. Optimists and pessimists are both blind to the possible. Oof. This is not a homework assignment, but maybe it should be a reading material. It's really good. And so to move beyond optimism and pessimism is not to reject or truth claims, it's to honor them, but to have a more hopeful stance of what the world and the internet could be. And so that's what we're hoping for the series, to have a wiser relationship with the internet and artful relationship with the internet. And Kat and I, and the guests that we have, the wonderful four guests that we have invited, we're not experts at internet realism, and we're seeing this interview series as an inverse course. And we're here to learn from you, the collective wisdom that has gathered here at Internet Real Life. And then I'm going to put there's some context in the chat if you want more download on this dialectic. But the question that we're going to be living with throughout the series is, how will an internet realism position show up in practice for you, us? And this is something, and a living question is not a question to force an answer. It's to kind of stay with, to allow it to, alchemize in your body. And you can answer this through one of the writing assignments we offer each week, or through an art project, or through some kind of interesting experiment. And the last cohort we did in November, we had a lot of cool experiments that emerged from that, and we're hoping more so will happen this time. So yeah, so I'm going to take in Kat in a moment. She's going to introduce the speaker, but how today is going to work is we're going to have a presentation followed by a Q&A. And if you have questions anytime, pop them in the chat. We're going to bias chat-based questions, not the hand emoji, and then Kat will select, not in order as when they come. And then just unmute yourself, ask your question, keep it concise, and then only one follow-up. And then around the hour mark, we'll press we'll stop the record button, take about a 5-minute break, and then we'll engage in the collective inquiry, which I will share more details then. So yeah, that being said, Kat, taking you in.
Hey, it's great to see so many familiar faces here. I'll keep this brief. I'm very excited to introduce Molly Soda. She's a wonderful artist. She really understands the soul of the internet. If you were on Tumblr in the early days, you probably are well acquainted with her work. Yeah, this is just really special for me as a as an old school Tumblr person. And I'm super excited. Uh, Molly, you can take the stage.
Okay, I'm gonna start with a few things. I will be sharing my screen in a moment. I love to do, oh, where did I put this? Okay. I love to do like a shared Google Doc whenever I do any sort of talk or presentation that's virtual. So I trust you to be polite, but also it's fine. So I'll be dropping like relevant links in here, but you can decorate and add anything that comes up for you, whether it's images or other links or things. I just like to like save these and have them. So feel free to like do what you want in there, within reason. Okay, so, and then I will share my screen. I'm just gonna do a brief sort of artist talk, and I'll touch upon my work and how it relates to kind of some of the things that y'all will be thinking about for the next 4 weeks. So cool. Can we see my screen? Can we see my desktop? Okay. Um, I love to catch a glimpse of someone's desktop when they do a presentation because it feels like super forbidden. So this is my desktop. I will be pulling some things off of here. But first let's go to Chrome. So here we are. Here we are. So hi, my name is Amalia Soto. I work as the artist Molly Soda in New York. My work takes on a variety of forms, but I'm predominantly interested in straddling this line between artist and user. It's important for me to make a distinction that even though I don't go by my legal name, something the internet has sort of increasingly asked of us, especially with the advent of Facebook. My work is no more performative than what anyone else does when they create a profile online. We're just like scrolling through my website right now, which I have linked in the doc. And if you notice on my website, everything is an external link. Who's sorry now is a webcam. I don't even know where half of these things lead. But all is to illustrate that my work is sort of scattered across the internet in various states of legibility and decay in various platforms. Half of the time these things end up leading to a broken link because that's the way that these things end up going. But everything goes outward instead of sort of being contained on a website or like a portfolio website, for example, because my work is very scattered and I kind of like having things that way. Posting myself on the internet began long before I was publicly known as Molly, and long before I even conceived of wanting to be an artist. Before there was Molly Soda. So I've tried to collect a lot of these old accounts on this arena page, which I'll link shortly. There was La Mona Volvo, Laundromat Love, Wet Nap, Runaway Ship, Ghosties, Flea Markets, and even Amalia Soto. I've been documenting and posting my likeness to the internet for over 2 decades now. And a lot of the older kind of interactions I had with the internet, for example, on platforms like LiveJournal or Zynga or MySpace, XYZ, are pretty much existing in sort of these weird, they're either gone or they're existing in kind of these weird half legible spaces. And what's really thrilling is that kind of one of the only things that's left that I found of that time, this is like a screenshot of a snippet of my Zynga account from, this is 2004. And to me, like that is more thrilling than like any photo that I could have saved from that time from a digital camera, because I feel like it gives you so much information. And this is the sort of stuff that I think we take for granted, these sort of like interfaces and these things um that we engage with on a daily basis, sort of like this mundane. And I'm very interested in working with that and documenting that in my practice and this is just like, to me, this is like this beautiful artifact. And I'm so happy that I have it, but it's all that I have left of my Xanga, other than just like the raw text, which I do have backed up. Sorry, I'm trying to minimize this. So it's just like one example. Try and see what else we have here. I wanted to pull up an old post, and also I'm often reworking kind of these older things that I was doing on the web into current work, but it's always like becoming abstracted. So everything that I make is sort of like collected and reworked into newer work. So for example, like this blog post about a dream that I had about trying to kill my boyfriend, my like fake dream boyfriend that I wrote on Xanga in 2004, then gets reworked into, let's go to my current Tumblr. We're going to be doing a lot of bouncing around into like a different piece 21 years later, right? And then this was also text that I had in a play that I recently did. So it's constantly kind of like moving in and out and becoming abstracted, or I'm constantly extracting from these things. Let's go back to my website for a sec. And when I was a teenager, my MySpace bio read, "I want to tell you everything and nothing at the same time." And it's a phrase that I come back to very often, as it has maintained its relevance in my approach to making and sharing work myself online after all of these years. So if Molly Soda isn't a character, then she surely must be oversharing or telling the truth. And, you know, the real truth is that what I do can be seen as a long series of experiments that we all undergo, learning how to seem more interesting, more attractive or funny through trial and error. We copy our peers. We learn social codes by making mistakes. We post for attention, but we pretend that we don't want it. We become obsessed with authenticity. And eventually everything we do will become embarrassing once enough time passes, and then maybe it will become cool again. And so I'm really interested in like this tension of things, how things age online and how they eventually take on this new sheen depending on like how much time has passed. So like, and this is also why I sort of have this like, it's so funny because I feel like this week in particular, I was feeling very shy. But one of my things is I don't like to delete anything or remove anything from the internet that I've posted. And it's not because I think that that's like the way to be, but because it's sort of like a challenge that I give to myself, because I really do believe if you just wait long enough, it might become interesting again, or there might be something there that is worth looking into. But at the same time, I spent like Sunday like archiving a bunch of like posts on Instagram and like feeling very self-conscious. So it's not to say that I'm always not falling into this trap of wanting to sort of call or like have some sort of control over how I am perceived online, even though if you were to like look at what I do on the internet, you would be like, this person doesn't delete anything anyway. So but I think what I mean is that I'm sort of interested in these cycles and these threads and how these things are all connected. So for example, for some reason, and I promise I'll get into like a little bit more modern day, I don't only work with stuff that I did in high school. This is just to set the scene, and to also give you context to how long I've been doing this. And it's not that what I've been doing is even like that unique. Like I think most people my age have had long storied histories with the web and with different accounts. It's just that my approach might be a little bit more like obsessive, or I'm just holding on to onto a lot of that stuff still. So for example, like for some reason, my hard drive from when I was a teenager is still somehow works. And so I've been really fortunate to still have all of those. I was like a person that took a lot of photos. Um, in high school, I was like the person in the front group with the camera. I ended up going to school for photography, which led to my trajectory, which I'll get into. But a lot of this stuff on that hard drive was stuff that I had posted to LiveJournal of like me and my friends, or like hanging out, or selfies, or whatever. And it's been interesting seeing sort of the resurgence of digital photography, especially like early digital photography aesthetics with younger internet users now, in terms of like everything has that kind of like old camera. People are carrying digital cameras to parties. Like there's sort of like this reappraisal of lo-fi digital photography. And so it's interesting how this kind of like these images, this is a project that I did called Haircuts Folder, that end up taking on this new sheen because of the way that kind of they've been this imagery has been recontextualized. So it becomes like more interesting or more sexy and less embarrassing all of a sudden. And so with this project, I was also interested in really putting my sort of like mundane photos that I probably wouldn't have even posted, because they weren't that interesting, or maybe they were like bad photos, or they didn't have someone's face in them, or they were like a mistake, along with the first sort of like folder or center of my aspirational goals growing up, which was the haircuts folder, where I would save photos of other girls on the internet, and because I wanted their haircut, but I think I wanted more than their haircut. I think we all sort of do this, right? We like see something and we add it to a Pinterest board, or we save it for later, or we bring it to our hairdresser, or what have you. But it's less about like what it is that we're looking at, and it's more about like what that image is sort of like implying, so that there's always this sort of striving happening. And so that folder, which was very private for me, and it's the first time I've made this public, but 20 some odd years later, it's always sort of like this moving target, right? Of like what's cool or what's interesting. And I'm very interested in like how this stuff evolves and changes, especially in like girl spaces online, and how, I don't know, how it's sort of this impossible thing to grasp, right? This like there's always something that you're striving towards, and you're always sort of failing at it as well. So I was interested in making these images public, and also putting them side by side with my kind of like just high school images. And this is all on a Tumblr account, just my own sort of slowly adding to this over time. I'm going to get a little bit more contemporary now. So not only was I someone that was very online at a young age, but I also went to school, as I mentioned, for photography. And that's where I started. And so I was like keeping this kind of consistent online account, these like predominantly LiveJournal at the time, because this was like the early to mid 2000s, before pre-Tumblr. I was doing that, and I was having like my online life, and then I was in school for photography, and I wanted to be an artist. And if you were to look at what I was doing in school, it was very like black and white photography. And it wasn't until kind of I started to learn about performance and video art and net art and all of these things that had sort of happened before me that I didn't have access to when I was younger, or couldn't even conceive of, was when I started to merge the two, right? I started to think about ways that I could work within these online spaces in a way that felt like art, but also a lot of that was was trial and error, and a lot of that was like kind of fumbling my way through it. So I started a Tumblr account in 2009, and I actually I can't be held responsible for what was on my Tumblr back then, but I think I have a Wayback Machine archive, so do with whatever like is on here what you will. But so this is, yeah, January 2009 is when I started my Tumblr. I can point to some other, what do we have here? And this is when I first started formally going by Molly Soda. So before that, I had always been Amalia. Molly was never my nickname. No one ever called me that. My parents do not call me that. Anyone that knows me before 2009 probably calls me Amalia still. And Molly Soda was sort of inspired. When I started my Tumblr, it was just a username, but it was also something that was inspired by sort of like this generation of scene queens and MySpace kind of era celebrity. I was like interested in that kind of those kind of like usernames or like those aesthetics, although I would never let myself like fully go into that. And I was also really interested in Lydia Lunch and like the downtown scene in the 80s in New York. And so I was sort of thinking about like, okay, a stage name, but also a username. And I had no idea that my Tumblr would grow the way that it did. I think I was just very natural at like using whatever the next platform was, and it felt exciting to me, and I loved that it wasn't exactly blogging. Like I didn't have to write. I could just like share the pictures that I had saved to my desktop because I thought they were cool, and it was just a really exciting space to be in at the time. And so if my early Tumblr, I'm really like working through a lot of the stuff that I think shows up in my work now, like doing these like, I don't know, these sort of like online performances or like shit posting or just like experimenting like with what I could do. And out of school, my first major, oh, this is cool. Okay, love. And at the same time, as I was starting my Tumblr, I was also posting a lot to YouTube. And so if you were to go to my YouTube channel, I have 493 public videos on my YouTube, and I've been posting them consistently since about 2010. And for me, the work on my YouTube isn't necessarily like these finished art pieces, although some of them are. A lot of it is just like webcam clips or videos. And so for a long time, I was just posting these like daily videos to YouTube as kind of just like an exercise of kind of accumulation and also just like experimenting. So none of them are like thrilling. I think the oldest one is from 2010. So a little bit after I started my Tumblr. And I still to this day use it quite a bit. And it's usually for stuff that just like doesn't have a place that it needs. No one YouTube is like a place where like I post things because they don't need to go anywhere else. And so it just becomes this sort of like dumping ground. And I'm very like I'm pro dumping. And I will, let's see, like the most recent one was like 8 days ago. So, but then there'll be longer pieces. And I want to get into a few of my works, I guess. I know that Tween Dreams was linked here, this was my senior thesis in college, actually. And this was the only time that I've done actual like character work. So Tween Dreams was a sort of an online miniseries that I did where I essentially played every character, and I was these like tween girls, and we were like also again thinking about striving and like fantasy and like, but also showing the actuality. So essentially all they want to do is be older, all they want to do is go to high school. They're like fantasizing about being in high school, and they end up crashing like a party, and it's sort of like, is this big letdown? And I think this work always felt very separate from the rest of the work that I've done since then. This is from 2011. And it wasn't until recently that I've been thinking that it actually feels more connected. The piece is also shot sort of on a mini DV camera of the POV of like what it would look like if you were like shooting this with your friends. I did a lot of that growing up, was like shooting me and my friends, like doing fake like SNL sketches or like shooting fake music videos. I think and it's interesting because all that stuff was private. There was no place to put it online. Now that people like, there's younger kids that are sort of like simulating makeup tutorials or these things, and I'm seeing them on TikTok, right? Or I'm seeing them on YouTube. And this was all sort of pre that era. But that impulse has always remained, right? To sort of like enact these things or like strive towards something. But as opposed to now, those things weren't able to be sort of scrutinized and commented on by like a litany of other people. And so speaking of, and so a lot of my work, my current work is kind of like interested in mining kind of these like these spaces, especially like online trends or things that are happening, and then kind of attempting to mimic them. But I'm always doing it wrong. And I don't necessarily always know that I'm doing it wrong. Here's like a really classic example that I like to show. So I'm often like, here we go. We don't have to like actually listen to this, but I'm often working within these spaces, and what I will do is that I will sort of respond to what's happening in these spaces by making my own content. For a long time, when I first came across, like, for example, like the beauty community on YouTube in 2013, I remember being like really excited by it, but not knowing how to work with it, and not knowing how to make work about it. And I think my approach with a lot of the stuff has been to try and immerse myself within it and also like emulate it and make work about things that I actually consume and that I'm actually like a part of. I mean, I was never like a beauty influencer. But what's interesting is that in the sort of attempts to perform, or mimic these things that you're seeing, there are rules, right? And so people will kind of let you know when you've failed. And so in this video, this wasn't a video that I intended to be kind of anything in particular. It was just like an eyeshadow tutorial that I decided to do. This is from what, like 2016, 2017. But if you look at the comments, you know, it becomes this, there's 648 comments. This is sort of a one-off video that I posted for no particular reason. And it's people kind of wondering like, oh, is this a joke? Like, this is so bad. You should do this to your eyebrows. You should do this you should wax your mustache. You should do these things, right? People giving me advice, people defending me to each other. Like, it becomes this entire kind of like thing of like, how do we regulate this person's like performance online? Like, how are they failing? How do we regulate them? How do we regulate each other? And so for me, not everything that I post is always this fully realized like piece or this thing. It's always like, sometimes it's an experiment. And I'm not like trolling when I make this video. Some of these videos I am I might have been trolling in the past, but like something like this is like, I don't think I had realized like that I was going to fail to such a, to such an extent, because I don't think I saw it as a failure. And so I'm always interested in sort of like this doomed energy or this like failure to perform. And I made it really hard for myself to find things on my desktop today. But for example, this video then becomes this piece where I'm installing it in a gallery, and we're having kind of like the video playing on the iPad with all the comments sort of being honored. And often I work I'm interested in the feedback and the interplay between myself and my audience and what's happening, and that sort of tension. That's why I'm so, that's why like I put work online, is because I'm interested in what's going to happen. It sort of becomes this like interesting, it's very generative for me. Like I do think about like posting on YouTube as like, I think we're like generative art became this like funny buzzword, and I'm like, posting anything online is like a generative art piece if you really think about it. And I'm trying to think. I often work comments into my work. I had like a few examples of that somewhere, but perhaps here's a recent one. This is actually on another piece that I did called Inbox Full, which is the first piece I would say that I made like right out of college. And it was, so because I was getting a lot of attention on Tumblr, I was also, so there was if anyone remembers being on Tumblr, I'm sure many of you do, there was an ask function on Tumblr where you could submit a question or a comment, and someone could read it, or I could respond to it, and it would show up on my blog, essentially. So the only way, essentially, someone would send you an anonymous message, or it could be connected to a username. And if you were to respond to it, it had to be responded to publicly, right? It was never, there was no like DMing. It was like it would show up on the blog, and it would be this public sort of display. And so I think it became sort of this like interesting performance between question asker or commenter and blogger, because they were sort of like, they had to go back to your blog to know if you answered their question. So it became this thing where they were kind of like wanting it to show up, right? They were wanting you to answer it publicly. It became this thing where both of you were kind of doing this thing. And I was very like often answering these questions, but for a while I started to collect them all. This was around 2011, 2012. I don't remember exactly when this was rolled out, but this was that era. And one day I decided to sit down and read every single comment that I had received on my in my Tumblr inbox, and ended up making this piece called Inbox Full. It's a 10-hour video. I didn't intend for it to be 10 hours. I also shot this on my webcam. If you'll notice, I often use webcam and it's kind of like user grade cameras. If the vloggers are using a certain type of vlogging camera, I'm using that vlogging camera. I'm using my phone. I'm using a webcam, because I like to stay within the language of the spaces that I'm making work about. I'll play like this is a 5-minute clip, but I think in the interest of time, I'll play even less than that. But you can watch the whole thing on YouTube. I will link it. Okay, let's just start from the beginning. We'll play like 2 minutes.
So I've been talking to this straight guy, and he finally made a move on Friday night when no one was looking at us. And we talked about it, and he seemed fine, but we haven't talked since then, and I texted him first and everything. I just don't want to seem vulnerable, and I'm afraid he's ignoring me. What do I do? Are you God? Other times I want to crush you. Hey, I was wondering if you could share some of your favorite music right now. I think your taste is amazing, and I'd love to hear it. Thanks. And other times I feel like you're too good for me. Molly, you are so amazing. I want to sit and watch movies with you and sing songs with you and get drunk with you. You are just bloody fantastic. Did you and Hot Sugar / Nick break up? What does Molly soda taste like? You know you would be a valuable asset to any advertising or marketing firm, right? You have succeeded where most everyone seems to be failing horribly, which is appealing to the current youth demographic. Your sense of aesthetics and style align with where culture is heading. The level of fandom you've reached is legitimate proof of that. I affirm we acknowledge this. You could easily get a job in advertising. I promise you. Someone with your level of insight is in high demand. What stories? places I've gotten kicked out of for taking pictures. I was always curious if you had done a BFA. Now I know, and all I can say is I knew it. I'm studying my BFA in Australia. Yay. Do you have a photography website? I think you're absolutely fab, and I'm glad we share the same first name. No, there was a lot that is right with them. You're
Okay. I encourage you to watch all 10 hours if you would like to. I recently did that and it was like very funny. It was sort of like became this time capsule of what was being like discussed in 2012, not only like in my personal life, but also just like what was popular at the time, or like there was, funnily enough, like a lot of Taylor Swift discourse in my inbox, which I was kind of surprised to see. But anyway, okay, in the interest of time, I want to wrap it up a little bit. Um, and I want to think about thinking about these like sort of, let me close a couple tabs. Let's do that. Oh, wow, thank you. Oh my God, I love the tomatoes. Okay. Um, I want to think about, I think maybe I'll just end it on one final piece. Let me open my YouTube again. Or maybe just think about other ways that I kind of work with these online aesthetics. Like, for example, a more recent one, which I did in 2023. Where are you? Um, this is so I was thinking a lot about kind of like the hyper clean and like routine based sort of aestheticization of routine that was happening on TikTok and YouTube. It's been happening for a while, but I felt like it really hit kind of like a head in the during the pandemic. I think predominantly because people were like indoors, they were making a lot of content inside. And I think just like we were consuming a lot of this content that also like told us how to live our lives better while we were indoors and how to like make. So I was thinking a lot about like the labor of not only like doing those chores in the first place, but then having to film it and edit it and like make it sexy for the internet. And then I realized that like sort of as things were like opening back up and this sort of aesthetic was becoming old because these things move quickly online. There was sort of like this turn or like this like refusal where people were really interested in like sort of showing like real. And it's funny because a lot of these routine videos you see will say like realistic day in my life, realistic routine. And I was really interested in like how no matter what we're doing, it still needs to be mediated and constructed. And so I did sort of this like inverse of like a messy girl aesthetic, or like this like feral girl clutter aesthetic. And so I made this piece where I kind of intentionally messed up my otherwise like not too bad room. Let's see if it's not perfect. This can't all just be like sitting on the bed. Also, it's like all folded, so it might be better to undo some of this stuff. See if we can get it on that chair. That's good. Yeah, draping stuff over chairs seems to be a good move. Maybe I'll drape some stuff over the cat tree as well. Decided to take some items from my closet and put them over the cat tree. I'm even gonna take off my own socks so it looks like I took them off before getting into bed. Okay, you see the idea. And then I think like one final, there's like so much I could talk about. I think I've like made too much stuff. But I think I'll leave it with one final sort of example of how I work with accumulation when it comes to like my work, and how one sort of video or piece can turn into like a larger project over time. So this is sort of like a durational performance that I've been doing for the last like 10 or 11 years now. And it started as a seed, as one video of me like singing a Death Cab for Cutie song. Um, and every year, this is from 2013. I think this original, yes, 2013. And then eventually I decide to like kind of sing with myself singing again, and so on and so forth. And what's really wonderful is that I'm also, not only am I like doing this ritual where I sort of begin to sort of age next to myself and I keep building upon this thing, but we're seeing it's just like I showed you that Venga pic earlier, we're seeing kind of the context, which to me is so important, is the ad and the way that the photo booth even looks and the way that YouTube looks and how these things are subtly changing all the time and how no one really seems to care about like these sort of nuisances, right? Like this ad or these things, but to me are actually quite important. And so eventually, I continue to do this. The audio starts to get choppy and feedback, and it becomes, I'm almost like trying to perform like my old self, where I'm trying to like get to that feeling that I had when I first made the video, and so it becomes this kind of just like interesting loop, I suppose. So this was so I'll have to do 2025 in the next couple months. Okay, I think I'm gonna stop there. I feel like I just like loaded you with a lot of information.
That was great.
Okay.
I really like that project. Uh, my man, I have so many questions. I would say, I guess my first question is, something I've had trouble with in my own work is like the impossibility of archiving the internet. And
Yeah.
I was curious like what your feelings on that are as someone who does have this like huge body of work. Like what do you think gets lost even when you save as much as you do?
I think you have to be okay with things getting lost. And like I think that's the weird conundrum about my work sometimes, is that like I'm relying on these platforms to keep it safe. And sometimes the platforms end up keeping it safer than what I could have done in my own, with my own hard drives, for example. Like that inbox full video is it's like my hard drive crashed when I after I filmed, a year after I filmed that. And so, the piece that's like in a collection in a museum is a YouTube rip, so it's like interesting because you never know like what's going to be the more stable mechanism for keeping this stuff safe. And also like I think if you have an exhaustive archive, it almost makes it more boring, when actually if you have just a few pieces, it's a little more thrilling, right? Like it's almost like giving into the chaos helps like cull some of this stuff for you, as opposed to being so exhausted, because these things are like living, breathing things. And also like my YouTube looks very different than your YouTube when you watch my video. So like how am I going to account for like every single instance, right? Like I can only do so much. And so it's more about like doing your best, but also knowing that like this is quite volatile.
What role do you think the conversation around certain pieces plays? Like for example, you mentioned people thinking you're trolling when you like try to emulate like a makeup tutorial, right? Like do you think they would have thought you were trolling if the YouTube comments had a different reading, or if like I don't know, the conversation online in general in that space was different?
Yeah, I wonder if like, I don't know. I think the comments do make up a lot of it, because I think even when I watch something, I'm almost looking at the comments to either like affirm how I'm feeling or change my mind, right? I'm almost like, is anyone else feeling this way as I'm watching this TikTok? Or like, are they actually getting, or sometimes you open it and you're like very shocked to see that people are having like the discussion that they're having. And so I think sometimes it can really like shape kind of the reception that's happening, right? Because all of this stuff is also like very contextual. And I even think about how the way that we're fed things now, I'm thinking about Reels in particular, because I've noticed that like Reels intentionally gives you things that are going to make you upset. Or that don't align with like what you're maybe interested in because they want you to engage. And so I wonder if that's also kind of like this, I don't know, it's interesting to see how that's also been like changing or like shaping. And but it's almost like we need the comments to sort of like confirm or like help guide us in this way.
You made a really interesting comment about how we've sort of always been recording ourselves, and what's changed is sharing it.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm curious if you think like something I've heard a couple of times is people feel like the internet is less creative now. And I'm kind of on the fence about that personally, and I was wondering what your take on that is.
I think that people are so okay. I kind of feel like maybe I don't know if I agree with that. I think from an artist perspective, I do feel like maybe because it's this thing that's just a part of life in a way that it wasn't before for me. When I was like growing up, I was like, this is like sort of new and somewhat fringe to be like participating within these subcultures. And of course, you move to New York and you're like, everyone dresses the same as me. But you know, when you're growing up in Indiana, you don't know that yet. And so, but I think that there's just this exhaustion with the internet. So I think a lot of stuff just like I've been thinking about this with TikTok, for example. I'm like, okay, what are the video artists on TikTok? Or like who are the artists that are like working with like this platform that are doing something weird with it? Because I remember like on YouTube, there were people doing weird things with YouTube. When I was like, you know, in college, or like even when I was doing weird things with YouTube, there was like sort of these fringe things happening there. And I feel like maybe there's less of that, or there's less interest to engage with this stuff because people are just like exhausted by it. And it's not like thrilling or exciting. It's just like this thing that's like a part of it. And I do think that this is something that I see often in art, is like a lot of people just don't want to even, people almost like want to pretend the internet doesn't exist.
That's a really good point. Like when I think of who are like the TikTok artists, it feels like they're part of the platform in a way that on YouTube they weren't. Like there was almost a distance. Whereas I think there are like TikTok artists, but they're of the platform in a different way.
Yeah, it's more like content creation versus like, I don't know. It's also like content creation becomes like its own sort of thing, and it just feels like there's like levels to like art, what people consider
Uh,
art.
I'm gonna pass the mic to Peter, see if he has any questions.
Thanks, Kat, and thanks, Molly. It was an awesome presentation. For the Q&A, we have a lot of awesome questions, so we're probably going to go about 10, 15 minutes past the hour. So I got one question. It's related to Honor Levy's session. You know, the Nordic LARP scene, the live action role playing, they're like have a really like robust community, and they have a concept called bleed, where when they have a character performance, the character's like personality bleeds into their own. And there could be like a positive bleed, like it like gives them more confidence in life, or a negative bleed, like, you know, some psychosis transfers. And so I'm wondering if something like that happens with you in all your performances. Any particular piece was transformational, had a positive or negative effect on you personally?
I think that that the bleed for me actually probably happened when I started going by Molly Soda, because I felt like when I was always, I think that actually a lot of people that are really good at the internet are quite shy. Or like you'll meet people that are like popular online, and then they'll be like kind of like not the most talkative person in the room, or like the person that's wanting the most attention, right? And I feel like with Molly Soda, it was a way for me to sort of like air out, like try on things that like maybe I wasn't able to embody in my real life, or like it felt like this separate thing. And I think as that account grew and as people started to know me as that, I was able to like embody that more. But it felt like this private thing, and it wasn't until I was sort of like dragged into the public with it that it started to bleed. But it's funny because the aesthetics of Molly Soda are also like quite different than what I had been doing prior, I guess. Like if you had like looked at me like a year before, it was like you would have said that like you would have been surprised or something. So I think it also like allowed me to maybe like try certain things in a comfortable space. But I think it did really influence me, because I think there was a bit of a performance going on. Like Molly Soda was very like, she really didn't care. Like I look at like what was happening on there, I'm like, I really didn't care what people thought about me. Like it really didn't bother me.
That's really cool. That makes a lot of sense that when like the Molly Soda character came up, the bleed started happening. A quick follow-up to that, is there any sort of like, I imagine a lot of it's intuitive, but like, is there any like aspirational bleed that you have? Like, oh, I really wish Molly Soda did this crazy thing in order to like, get this boost of character or whatnot.
Aspirational bleed. I mean, probably I would have to think about what that would be. But yeah, I mean, I think this stuff is so blurry. Like all of it is like you don't know like where certain desires or things are always coming from. I mean, I think I only now have started thinking about why I did what I did in the first place. Like you start to think about, you start to analyze like why you even were posting the way that you were when you were younger, right? But no, I think all this stuff is very blurry, and I find that very interesting, I suppose.
All right, let's get some questions from the audience, from the class. um there is one that Peter, you had flagged. I can't seem to find it now.
Francesca had a really good question.
Yeah,
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself, Francesca, and you can ask your question.
Hi, I have to go back to it because I don't find it anymore. Because I asked another one right now. Just give me 2 seconds here. Oh, yes. So basically, do you think that if suddenly you would lose every online record that you ever had, will you feel it like a very severe identity crisis?
Identity crisis? No. No.
Okay.
I feel like I think that I'm much more detached to like who I am, who I was online, and I feel so much more detached. I think it might be an age thing. I think it might be because the internet has evolved the way that it has, and like my social life isn't connected to the internet the way that it was when I was like 22, where I was like making friends. I'm much older now, and like that's not it's I think I would be upset because I would have lost things that maybe I had intended on archiving, but I think for me, I would be like, this is a sign from God. And like I need to move on.
That's interesting. I'm asking you because, like, for my peers, all they have is their online identity. And so we
What do
have
you
a
mean?
lot of it's like we were talking about being online and everything you have online. So from your Instagram profile to your Tumblr as a fashion accessory. I mean, you do not have an identity crisis if you lose your favorite bag, but it is a very distinct and important part of yourself. And so basically what we're realizing is when we go out in places where we know people through their IG handles first.
Yes.
And so that is, a really relevant part of who you are. So a lot of people were like, if I'd lost everything, I don't really know who I would be, or not even that. It's like a great part of who I am is basically online. I wouldn't know how I would be, how would I present myself if I didn't have, like, my online personality.
Right, yeah. It's sort of like, but I think yeah, it's interesting. But are you saying, if you lose that, you don't lose the ability to do that again, I guess, or like to have these things? Because like people do lose these things all the time. Things get
Right,
taken down, things get removed.
right. But it's very interesting how the conversations change in between generations.
Mhm.
So this is why I asked. Thank you.
Yeah.
Liza, you had a question at 11:43. If you want to unmute and ask it.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I had a question. You mentioned how when you, at your younger age, you were sort of doing these performances, but it was slightly less privy to the public eye. And now girls in this age, or not even just girls, but like young people at this age, they're kind of making the same performances mirroring, the current trends, but they are much more privy to like subject to the opinions of other people. And my question was, do you feel like anything is being lost, or perhaps what what does this change really like entail?
I find it a bit concerning that we share the internet with, like, when I'm on TikTok with every age group ever. And like that's like interesting to me, but I also like do not need to be interacting with content from children. I think it's inappropriate. And I think it's like not I don't know, it's just very different, right? And also these platforms encourage virality in a way that like early platforms did not do that. Like you're making a TikTok video until it goes viral. And then you might go viral and then maybe you'll get a bunch of followers or a bunch of engagement and then you'll disappear from everyone's For You page again. And no one's really encouraged to like keep up with you in the same way. Um, and I guess like for me, it's interesting because every once in a while I'll like see kind of this content of people sort of like talking about like girls like doing their makeup or their skincare routines, and these are like young girls. Like I'm not talking like 16, I'm talking like 13, 12, and they're talking about like their boyfriend and like drama in their friend group and things like that. And like it's all coming from growing up watching like older people do this. And I would have been doing that had I had the ability to do that, because all I wanted was to be older and be like sexy, or to be like certain things that like were sort of be that I was could only perform in private, right? Or like maybe with my friends. I so I don't know that it's great for people to have the ability to kind of like stumble upon that and find that, and also like for your peers to have that, because you should be kind of allowed to like experiment. And even when I was on Zanga or LiveJournal, maybe some of my peers from like school or real life interacted with that part of me, but it wasn't open to like everyone because not everyone was on those platforms. And so I think it's very, very different now. And I find it like, I don't know, it just feels like you grow up, you already grow up like kind of thinking about how other people perceive you all the time, but I think this adds like this extra sort of paranoid layer to it that I find like worrying.
Josh had a good yeah, we had so many good questions. Josh, if you want to ask your question first, Josh Chin, to clarify, and then Hal, you had a question about ephemera and the old web. So Josh first, and then Hal.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. My question was about digital realism and digital footprints, right? Like, do you believe that we'll reach that point where we, I guess, can separate reputation from digital footprints? Like, kind of like you saw with JD Vance and his Venmo history, right? That was like a weird turning point where um, a lot of people rolled their eyes at it in a way that I don't think people would have like 2, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And do you think we'll reach a point where digital footprint is part of a person or judged as something completely separate? Because right now we're kind of like figuring that out socially.
We're sort of in this in between, and I think that we're getting, I think that there's some like I don't know. I think people should be allowed to like have weird digital foot. I mean, I think it depends, but also like it's not like these things can't be like concealed or deleted. So I don't really understand like sort of our obsession with this being truth and like everyone else like not being culpable of certain things just because they were better at sort of like deleting history or certain things. So I think maybe we are moving towards this place of more like everyone has this and like it's sort of more lax, but I don't know because I don't know. I also like wonder, it's so interesting because we have been this is probably the time frame where like I would have thought that something other than Instagram would have happened by now. Do you know what I mean? Or like we're still on Twitter. Like I'm just like I would have thought that new innovations would have happened with newer platforms. And of course there are certain things like Discord or TikTok or like XYZ, but like it's sort of like interesting that these things haven't like died in the sort of like natural life cycle that I think I would have given them, right? As opposed to a MySpace or some of these other platforms. So it's also like maybe because these things aren't aging in the same way, we're like almost like, well, it's there, right? And like it would have naturally gone away otherwise.
Hal, if you want to jump in with your
Yeah, sure.
question.
My question was sort of similar in the sense that to what extent should we or can we see sort of the incorporation of, because you were showing your older self with all of those sort of old portrayals of various parts of the internet, like this is the antiquarian interface from YouTube from like 2006 or whatever and all that stuff. To what extent is that like merged with someone's identity at a certain point? So like you look back at yourself and maybe all of these things. I mean, I'm just thinking with here maybe like an iPod Shuffle. Like I had one of those from 2009. I had all my music on like two of those. And of course, if you like choose your own playlist, that can become like a really important part of how you see yourself and like where your mental space. Like to what extent should that be considered like almost sort of at every stage like iterative transhumanism almost, because people are sort of like incorporating these like digital consumer products into the lives at a deeply ingrained way that when they look back they're like, oh, that was sort of like me and now I have like this sort of software update, but that was the older version of me, almost in this literal computer sense.
I think that's like a very provocative statement. I really like that. Like I was like when at first when you said it, I was like my YouTube interface from like 2010. Like I don't give a shit about that. Like in terms of my identity, but I think in a larger scope, like it does kind of like always move, right? Like I think people are always like attaching what that I feel like I see this all the time. It's like the era that I grew up in is the best era. And like those aesthetics are like what the best aesthetics are. And so, and therefore, and that's always shifting, right? With whoever has the power at the time. Like I remember growing up and watching like I love the 80s. And I was like, the 80s are so cool. Like the 80s are so cool. But I'm like, I'm not thinking about like any of that or any of those aesthetics anymore once like millennials had the power to dictate like what was cool and now like zoomers are like having nostalgia for Flickr, right? And so it's like it's always kind of this moving thing, and so I do think it's a great big part of your identity, these like tech movements and technology, because they're attached to these formative kind of moments, right? So like I wonder, like, is CD collecting going to like outlive, like, is record, I mean, maybe record collecting will like always be cool because of the fidelity of the audio, but I'm thinking like, are people just gonna have like really big CD collections soon enough, right?
So, we have time for two more questions. Let's do Clifford and then Julia. So feel free to ask your questions. Clifford first and then Julia.
Oh yeah, okay. I might have asked a few questions, but in general, I was wondering. First of all, I love your art. Loved the Tween Dreams episode that was sent out with this materials selection. Really incredible work. Um, Very inspiring. So ahead of its time. Yeah, it's great. And I'm just curious to know a little bit about when you started thinking of this, second self, or this Molly Soda like as a character, if you do think of it that way, and when that kind of thinking emerged, or how your relationship to that has changed over the years, maybe.
I think it's probably changed quite a bit. I feel like when I first started, I think maybe it was I don't think of Molly Soda as a character. I think of it as like any username that any of us dons. Like I'm sure we all have usernames and different profiles and different varying degrees of anonymity where we, you know, some places we're lurkers and some places we're front facing and whatever. And those performances are all slightly different on each context. And so for me, Molly Soda is just like one facet of that, as opposed to this thing where I'm like, this is my life and it's fake and like, oh, like, you know, I'm being this like thing. But at the same time, I will say that like when I first initially like started going by that username and getting attention, there was a very different performance happening than maybe when I started to get self-conscious that I had too much attention, and then a different performance happens, or when shifts in the internet happen and you start to reply accordingly, or when people start to know who you are when you walk into a room and you know, everything changes depending on like how much attention you're getting, like what's happening in your real life as opposed, and also like online, and what the bigger climate is online as well. And so now, you know, in 2025, I don't know that I would have picked the username Molly Soda and had known that I was going to like spend my entire art career going by this name, but it like is what it is at this point. So like, um, I don't know. I think that I don't know that I think of Molly Soda as a second self. I think it's just sort of like this thing that's constantly refreshing, but it's only like so much. Like you can only convey so much through a screen because it's always mediated, and also everyone is going to have sort of like a different feeling about it depending on like what, I mean, everyone's gonna have a different feeling about you in person too, but like there's only, it feels, it's like this sort of fake feeling of control, I think, that we all have about like our profiles. And we're like, if we only just like tweak this, or if we only look like more attractive, or if we only do this, it will like, people will like love us or give us attention, or like give us a job or whatever. But it's like, we're not quite like that in control.
I guess, but what is the distance between you and the Molly Soda like persona? Do you feel that it's an extension of yourself, or do you feel like it's more of a separate thing?
It's not a separate thing at all. I don't even know if it's I mean, I guess it's it's just the way that I use the internet. Like everyone uses the internet a certain way. So it's like, you know, like I'm going to use the internet a certain way, and then I'm going to go to the post office and talk to the person at the post office a different, like we're performing depending on the context all the time, whether it's IRL or online. Like we're constantly shifting and perfecting that performance all the time and practicing it. And I think in some ways, the internet performance that's happening is closer to maybe a way that we are performing for a mirror at home, because we're seeing like a selfie in itself is the same view as when you look in a mirror, right? It's like seeing yourself reflected. And so I think that for me, there's something that's almost like a little more private about the online performance in a way that becomes public. I don't know. I'm just like feeling this out as I'm saying it right now. So
So
All
interesting.
right, let's close it out with Julia. If you want to ask your question, and then we'll move into the collective inquiry.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Molly. This has been really interesting. So my question is, what would you consider the most cringe trend of the last year? And if you could also give what your definition of cringe would be.
okay, I hate cringe trend of the last year. What are trends that happened last year? Can anyone enlighten me? You can throw it in the chat. Okay, did you say what is my definition of the word
Yeah,
cringe?
that could also be part of, yeah.
I think that cringe is a failure to move someone. And so, or to like, I think one of the readings actually said it really nicely, that it was like a failure to like create an emotional response in someone, which I thought was quite. But to me, a cringe is like sort of a failure to perform correctly, right? Whether that's moving someone emotionally, whether that's doing the makeup tutorial correctly, whether that's like looking the right way for the right audience at the right time. But I think cringe is always changing depending on who's watching it, right? Like if I'm not part of like, the roller coaster community and I see like the roller coaster enthusiast talking about roller coaster drama, I might think that's cringe as an outsider, but that's not cringe for like an insider, right? Of that like space. And that's just like a example. I don't really like, I think I really like to gravitate towards things that are like sort of failing to communicate that thing to someone, if that makes sense. What's the most cringe? Oh, hmm. Failed emotional
I think it's
manipulation.
interesting too, because like what you say, cringe is a failure to like maybe elicit a response, but a lot of like what cringe content comes out like does clearly elicit a response. So it's just
But a
interesting.
negative response.
Yeah, yeah, negative response, but a response nonetheless. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know that I like to I guess like for me the cringe thing is kind of like I'm interested in it as a concept because I think we're all capable of feeling it and also like being that way. But I also think that we all just fail. Like we're all failing to be something. And like I think that that's just like a beautiful part of like being alive. And so it's like okay. Um I think that I remember like when the word basic was happening and that really frustrating me because I felt like it was just this thing that was like, well, I'm a good consumer and you're a bad consumer. And I think cringe is like an extension of those feelings, although in a broader kind of scope, I guess.
Yeah, that's
Something I think is really interesting about cringe is I keep seeing there's like a weird cultural amnesia about it. Like I remember the sort of like epic bacon tier thing. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people thought that was cringe at the time. And now Zoomers will say like, "Oh, well suddenly we're being so mean to millennials." And it's like, "No, millennials were thought that was stupid when it was happening." Right? But there's this like weird like cultural amnesia with it where like people constantly think we're becoming more aware of stuff being cringe when really like the word changes. Like millennials might have called it basic,
Right.
uncool, right? It's like we've never not cared about it, but there's always this sense of like we care more.
Yeah, and I think that also like people are so used to being mediated by the internet that like I feel like there's this weird I think that like there is more self-conscious. I don't know if everyone feels more self-conscious about everything that they're doing. And I think it's created this really interesting, like I remember when YouTube went from like only vlogs being suggested to me to video essays. And I was like, okay, now we're all a fucking expert. I'm like, I just want to see your grocery haul. I want to see your groceries. I don't want to know what you think about like this thing. Like we're all so fucking self-conscious because we always want to have, and this might come back to the receipts question, is we always want to have the right take. We always want to be fully formed. We cannot fuck up because there's all these people that are going to tell us that we fucked up and that we suck. And so I think that this is like also a product of like just the anxiety of failing and being online. And so everyone has to kind of like always be smart and like interesting and like sexy.
All right. We'll pause here. Let's give a round of applause to Molly for the awesome presentation and sharing some thoughts. Molly, any parting words you'd like to leave us with? Anything you'd like to promote?
Um, Thanks for having me. Thanks for the good questions. I'm around if you want to talk more. I'll come back for the second half too.
All right, beautiful. So we'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll explain the instructions. If you want to slip out now, feel free to do so. But we'll take a quick break.